Thanks for listening to Marketing B2B Tech, the podcast from Napier where you can find out what really works in B2B marketing today. Welcome to the latest edition of Marketing B2B Technology, the podcast from Napier. Today I have Riaz Kanani. He's the founder of Radiate B2B. Hi Riaz, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks Mike, really good to be here.
Great. I mean, the first thing I want to say is I looked at your LinkedIn and you've had an amazing career building different businesses. I mean, can you talk us through this journey and some of the things you've done?
Yeah, sure. It's been fun. I am the first to say that I've been very lucky, I think, to get involved in or do some of the things that I've done. I mean, I started when I was 16, really. I didn't really know I was running a startup, but I was, and I didn't even know it was a marketing company, actually, for that matter. I was consulting with companies on how to get onto the internet and making money that way and paying my way through university doing it. And it was only really as I learned more about the sort of, what you take today as the fundamentals of business, really, you start to understand all the acronyms and the language that you start to realize actually what I'm running is a marketing business, which, sounds silly in hindsight, but it's just the way I came at it. And actually doing that through university, I was part of the team that set up the radio station there. So I got into audio video through that. And actually it was that really got me started on the path to running my own technology business rather than continuing to do consultancy, because we discovered, and the naivety of an 18-year-old, I discovered that we could use Java technology to put audio and video onto every single computer out there. 99% of computers would play back this content, whereas for those that were around in the early 2000s, the best you could get was about 30% using either Windows Media Player or QuickTime. And so I looked at it and was like, well, surely every company under the planet that creates video is just going to automatically pick us. We're 3 times better. And I remember, jumping on a plane the day after my last exam at university across to Dublin. It was on Ryanair. We were delayed by about 2 hours. I landed at about 11:30 at night to meet the CEO of this company, who quite kindly had stayed up and waited for me, given I was 2 hours late, in hindsight. I had no real understanding of what was normal. And actually, in hindsight, that wasn't normal. And we had a chat. And then I rocked up in the morning and gave a presentation to this company. And it was a few hundred people or something in the auditorium about this technology and what we could do. And I came out all on a high and thinking, this is brilliant. And then landed back into London. And for the next 11 months and 3 weeks, not a single person returned our call. Nobody was interested. They all found it too technical and too difficult. And so we ended up pivoting that business to be a video advertising network. And the minute we did that, the phone never stopped ringing. And it was an amazing, that amazing hockey curve journey of doing campaign after campaign, jumping on a plane to the States and all the rest of it, right? And, we were all still very naive. We were all still in our early 20s. There wasn't as much, to do a startup in those days was still not really the sexy thing to do. And we followed best practice advice and actually screwed it up a little bit, really. And so I learned a whole lot about shares and options and equity and all these sorts of legal stuff that I, again, hadn't known at the time. And we ended up splitting that business. And eventually the business that we split out sold to Silverpop. And we then, myself and my co-founders, then helped to build Silverpop internationally. And of course that was really where Silverpop became one of the best ESPs, as they're called, email service providers, and then they bought a company called VTrends and launched B2B marketing automation platform, right, alongside Marketo and Eloqua. And so we built that up, and actually that was brilliant because we were setting best practice. We were talking about the best way to do B2B marketing, and really it was a heady time. And again, you don't realise it at the time. And then eventually, of course, that exited to IBM. And actually, it was around that point that I said that I would get out of doing startups. I'd done 4 startups by that point in various guises, if you count the pivots. And so I was going to get out of doing that. I was going to stop traveling quite so much. I was traveling a lot back then. And I was going to not focus on marketing so much, because I'd seen so many new marketing startups, and they were all basically big data plus whatever we'd done before. And they were the most dull things in the world to look at. And so I decided I was going to get out of all that. And in hindsight, it felt like a decade, right? But it was only 4 years. 4 years later, I'm back doing another startup. I'd managed to at least not do a marketing startup. We did a startup all about AI and knowledge, and basically putting the right content in front of the right quality content in front of business people. Nobody was interested in paying for it, so we shut it down. and I gave in and said, look, I was talking to a whole bunch of marketing directors, and I realised how much acquisition costs have risen in the last 5-7 years, and was looking at basically watching marketing directors basically every year turn around and go, right, we're going to invest more content, more events that are smaller on average than the year before. They're more micro, and we're going to have to increase reach. And whatever happens, that means your marketing budget is going to have to go up, just to stay the same, really. And that's not a great place to be. And so I thought, well, there must be a better way of doing things. And so we started to look at data. Again, I've built my career really throughout all of it. The common thread is taking data and trying to do something valuable with it. And we started to look at what we could do, and basically eventually that brings us to 3 or 4 years ago with the start of Radiate B2B.
That's an amazing journey, and going from literally startup at university all the way to startup that's now part of IBM, and then back to startup again.
yeah, I couldn't stay away.
Awesome. So, tell me a little bit about Radiate B2B. What problem were you trying to solve when you started the company?
Yeah, so the underlying thing that we saw quite early on, we obviously had these rising acquisition costs and the sort of drive for marketing directors to continuously increase the amount of output, just so they could get share of mind in terms of the market, in terms of the amount of content that they push out. And we looked at that and we were like, well, if you're a buyer and you don't care about a problem until that problem is something you care about, right? If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's not on your radar. So the minute you are thinking about that problem, you sort of dip your toe in, and we did some research a couple of months ago on this, and still today most people will do a Google search to look and find out about a problem they're trying to solve. Word of mouth comes into it as well. That was second. And when you do that today, an awful lot of the time the front page is crowded with vendor content, and most of the time, sadly, that vendor content is not very high quality. Mm-hmm. And so as a buyer, you tend to, we hypothesized anyway at that time, that buyers would increasingly go back to analysts and independent websites and third parties rather than vendors to do a lot of their very early research, and only start to come to vendor sites later. And if that's the case, that takes us back to really the sort of environment we were in 10 years ago when marketing automation platforms were first starting to come on the scene, where basically by the time the lead had self-identified, they were probably already talking or in talks with a couple of other vendors already. And so you're on the back foot. And so we wanted to figure out a way we could use data to basically understand your marketplace better, to therefore help sales development teams have better quality conversations and more of them, fundamentally. And that's what we sought to build. Now, I'll say one thing, which actually I think you'll laugh at in hindsight. Me being me, I built this brand spanking wireframe that was brilliantly cool. Showed everything. Went and showed all my contacts that I had about it, and they all laughed at me and said, "Riaz, there's no way we're going to bin our main marketing automation platform and put that in." And so I had to scale back my desire, if you like, to build this entirely new fancy marketing automation 2.0 platform, and build basically one of the early modules of it and then expand from there, sort of thing. So that's basically what we ended up doing.
It's interesting. You've mentioned a couple of times that the cost of acquisition's gone up in B2B.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating at a time when we've got all these new digital technologies that should, in theory, make it easier to reach our customers. So what do you attribute that increase in acquisition costs to?
Quite literally, it is competition. I mean, if you go back, obviously COVID has accelerated this. I mean, the costs of advertising on LinkedIn have rocketed in the last 12 months. At the end of the day, there's only so many finite spots that you can buy, and we did some analysis. Actually, we're playing in the enterprise space, right? We're playing in the selling to enterprise space, I suppose, to be more precise. And I'm sure you aren't surprised by how similar the lists of companies that companies go after are, and so that is the reality, is that it is a competitive marketplace, and we're all going after largely, not entirely, but the same types of customers, and of course we're all putting content online, and there's only so much content you consume in one go. At the end of the day, that's the one thing that all of us as humans have equal, is the amount of time we have in a day.
Interesting. So, I mean, your solution is focus effectively through account-based marketing. Is that
That's
a
right.
fair summary? Yeah.
Yeah. That's where we ended up, pinning our hat to, if you like. It's quite clearly an approach that we feel takes the traditional one-to-one of targeting a single company, and using our technology, we can scale it up to hundreds, if not maybe low thousands sort of level, and deliver a much better buying experience as a result, one that cuts through the noise and isn't quite so generic as non-ABM strategies tend to be.
So you're basically focusing on the most competitive part of the market. They're targeting these big enterprises. I mean, is that the biggest challenge? Is breaking through the noise, and how do you do that?
I think the biggest challenge is that the buyer themselves are obviously different, even to 5-10 years ago, right? So by far the majority are digitally savvy. They're very used to researching on the internet. They use social networks, customer review websites. The way they go about picking vendors is different. I remember seeing some research from LinkedIn a couple of months back, which talked about betas, BETAS, right, as a category of this new type of buyer. And they're talking about how, and actually in some ways it's quite funny, because it goes back in a way to a phrase that I used to hear an awful lot at the beginning of my career, which was, if you bought IBM, your job was safe. There was a better phrase than I can't remember it now, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And actually, interestingly, buyers today want to make a decision quickly, and they, but at the same time, they don't want to be taking too much risk of doing that, and so they're using brand as a way to mitigate that risk, if that makes sense. So your reputation and how good you are at what you do is a much more important part of the story than it was 5 years ago, sort of thing.
So what you're trying to do is effectively, by focusing that budget, build up a reputation for your customers with those key enterprises. Is that
that's right. So we basically do three things, right? So we do that advertising, company targeted advertising piece, which allows you to build massive awareness for very low cost inside those target companies, because often the advertising world, B2B businesses, only the very biggest B2B businesses that can do a broad brand based strategy.
Yeah.
This allows you to spend much less overall, but reach those very specific targets that you know would be either strategically valuable or, you know, a good fit from a value proposition. And so, yes, we do that. And then second, we use data to basically then identify which of those companies that you're targeting are in market today and actually would be open to a conversation. Because, you know, with enterprise sales, it's not typically, you don't normally, it does happen rarely, but you don't normally pick up the phone and suddenly close a deal. These are contracts that you typically are nurturing and building relationships with over time. And so we're one of the tools in that toolkit to help you do that.
Mm-hmm. You talk a lot about awareness and reputation with customers. That seems to be a slightly different take on what you're trying to achieve with ABM to what other vendors are saying, where other vendors are kind of saying, you know, try our solution, it will get you more sales. Whereas you seem to be saying this is only, from my point of view, it seems to be this is the first part of the journey of getting more sales. It's only part of ABM. Is that a fair representation of what you're saying?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. You know, our clients do get more sales. In fact, the average contract values are higher, and sometimes astonishingly so. I mean, one of our clients got a 7x increase in average contract value.
Wow.
From the program, but not for a second would I say that that's because they did an advertising program and magically at the end of it you got these massive increases. You know, it's a channel. It's one part of the toolkit. You've got to tie that in with other channels, you know, all channels working in coordination with each other to drive higher value and more clients.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, are you selling Radiate to marketing teams or are you selling them to sales teams? Or both?
That's a really good question. We primarily sell to marketing teams.
Yeah.
But we work very, very closely with sales teams. So it may well be that the advertising campaign is implemented by marketing, but there's a feedback loop from the sales enablement, sales development teams that comes back to us. We typically engage with that sales team early on in the campaign. And then, of course, the data that we produce from the campaign, as well as our other intent data feeds that we create, they all go directly to sales and get followed up on there, and again come back to us as a feedback loop afterwards. And it plays to that idea of ABM programs being sales and marketing joined at the hip.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, presumably then the data you're generating, you pushing that to other platforms, is integration an important part of your offering?
Yeah. So we'll push data directly into marketing automation, CRM systems, but sometimes just email. You know, it's always. I think once you've been in the industry as long as we have, you know, it's never a surprise, is it? That companies aren't always quite ready for the feeds into the systems themselves, and email just works.
Interesting. So the simplest technology is the most effective.
Yeah.
So I'm interested. I mean, who typically buys Radiate? Is there a typical customer in terms of industry or size or something that would benefit the most?
I mean, obviously, fundamentally, the first requirement is that you sell to enterprise, right? When we have conversations with companies that aren't selling to enterprise and they're selling products that are thousands of dollars, you know, low thousands of dollars in value. I'm not sure why I'm using dollars, given we're in the UK, but you know, clearly that's not a good fit for us. But yes, if you're selling to enterprise, I typically say that you are probably, you know, for where we are today, more likely it's a technology business. They're typically early adopters. You know, it could be manufacturing, it could be professional services, but most of our clients are technology businesses. We have some marketing agencies that we work with and some IT consultancies that we work with as well. But primarily it's that. And then to be honest, who they sell to, I think it's always really interesting. For most of the time, it's been pretty an even mix between targeting retailers and travel companies to finance companies to, from targeting HR people to marketing people or, again, finance people. Interestingly, over lockdown, we saw a surge in companies targeting HR people. That was an outsized shift in our client base for a period of time. We seem to be coming back to what I would call normality a little bit now, where we're back targeting pretty much all the verticals and various personas within it.
And was that move to HR? Was that because COVID became, to a large extent, HR's problem in different situations?
I think so. I think so. I mean, the conversations we used to see were basically that HR doesn't have time. We can save them time, but to get hold of them is really difficult. And obviously, one of the things that we're able to do is to plant a message in somebody. It's like the TV ad, right? It's one of my big disappointments with the digital world is that we got so hung up on data and click-throughs that we forgot the impact of brand. And a display ad is very similar to a TV ad in that it just nudges you. It's there in the side of your eye. You're aware of it subconsciously. And so we were able to go in front of these HR people who, were not browsing very much because they were so busy. But when they were browsing, we were able to see them, put advertising in front of them, and make them aware of what's possible to save them time in a period when they didn't have time and they were looking for ways to be more efficient in their time.
And in terms of targeting those people, I mean, I'm interested to know what you've seen working. If you want to target HR people, typically, I mean, normally what you have to do is target the whole company by IP and then filter out the people who engage with the ads. Is that how Radiate operates, or is there a different technology?
We use a range of things. It depends a little bit on the project, but we do all of that behind the scenes. Predominantly, though, what we're doing is using NLP. It's natural language processing, where we'll look at the pages that are being browsed, and we will make a decision as to whether that page is being viewed by the type of person we want to reach or not. And so that's typically how it works.
Wow. Okay. So you're categorizing the content to define who's likely to watch it, read it. Yeah. Interesting. So I'm intrigued to know, I mean, a lot of companies have tried ABM and not been successful. I'm really interested to know what approaches you think work, what's good, what you've seen being successful.
Yeah, there's it's been an interesting 4 years in that regard because we don't see quite so many ABM pilots. I mean, numbers wise, I guess they're more, but percentage wise, it's less. Whereas 2 or 3 years ago, almost every conversation we had was an ABM pilot. And if I look across those pilots, there's a range of things. I don't think there's a single thing you can say that was always the cause of failure. It's a whole bunch of things. So sales and marketing not working together. I mean, I remember one client who, we sat in a room with sales and marketing, and and basically we had a great conversation, and then we weren't going to share certain content with the other team. And that was a guarantee that project was going to fail if we let that happen. We didn't let it happen. We said, look, if you do this, the project will fail. And thankfully they didn't. But we have seen stuff like that happen where it has failed. Data, honestly, probably the thing that is the hardest thing to solve. I mean, something like sales and marketing alignment, in theory, it's, if you can get the two people to be at a table with each other and have a conversation, you at least got the opportunity to make that work. But data often is a much harder piece. Figuring out who to go after is actually, I think, one of the hardest things, because especially when you're starting out and you need to show a return on your pilot, far too often we would see companies come up with a list that may well have made sense, but invariably you don't have the processes and structures in place because you haven't been doing ABM to be able to scale an ABM program quickly. And so you fall into this weird middle ground where you've got a couple of hundred companies, let's say, but you don't yet have the processes in place to manage those couple of hundred companies effectively. And worse, if you go for too small a number, like say 10 or 50 companies, there's a pretty high likelihood that those companies aren't in market.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get 3 months in and you realize that actually you're left with such a small number of companies that could be in market that your project's never going to deliver a return. And so what we've seen work has been a couple of different methods. Either you go after enough companies that you can be sure that you're going to find some traction, and typically in that case we really simplify the ABM program, so it's an advertising program with the sales development follow-up type thing. So a really simple, not very complicated ABM program at all. And usually when we do that, we'll see an uplift in performance from the sales development team, and that uplift alone will probably pay for the program in itself. The other way to do it, and I know an awful lot of ABM practitioners who recommend this way, which is to go after customers that you want to expand. And that's a good way to start to understand the processes you need to put in place internally to actually have a successful ABM program. And then from there, expand to net new business. Now, that's obviously a slower way to create an ABM program that's driving new revenue. So again, it depends on your priorities inside your business. But the beauty of doing the customer upsell approach is you typically, I hope, know an awful lot about those customers, much more than you would do about net new prospects that you haven't yet engaged with.
Interesting. So, I mean, obviously there's like a whole range of levels of complexity, from targeting your existing customers at one end, which should be fairly easy. I mean, hopefully you know who they are, all the way through to building these lists of a few hundred targets. But in terms of actually deploying the technology, I mean, how complicated is it to deploy something like Radiate B2B that does, the advertising and tracks people on the website and brings you these analytics? It seems like it's doing an awful lot. Is it that difficult to use?
No, we are full service, so we take all the pain away. That makes it easier for our clients. But it's not exactly difficult from our side in terms of getting things set up. It takes us 48 hours to get set up. We create a tag which our clients put on their website. That's often the thing that takes the longest time in reality. So then, we load up the system, we manage all the optimization of all the advertising, we make the recommendations around what our clients should do. So often when clients are starting, they get to be handheld by us right the way through the program.
So that somebody could be up and running within a week, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We've had clients come in, they've called us on the Monday, and by the following Monday, the campaign was live. Wow,
okay. I mean, I hate to say it, but this level of support and the speed and the functionality, it sounds quite expensive. I mean, is it something that only the largest enterprises can afford?
So our target, if you like, in our goal is to make this available for mid-market. So mid-market companies selling to enterprise. So to give you an idea, spend-wise, you're probably going to have to spend on the advertising side from 25K annually.
Mm-hmm.
So not anywhere near
all,
the levels that you would normally need to get to do an advertising campaign online annually anyway.
Yeah, it's only a couple of £1,000 a month.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. And then is there a fee to use the platform, or is that covered by the advertising?
That's all. So yeah, so I've simplified it all completely from a pricing standpoint. So that includes everything.
Wow. Okay. So definitely mid-market companies, if they're selling something that's worth a few £1,000 or dollars, then clearly you can see the return coming very quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. I'm very aware of time. I'm just interested now. I mean, there seems to be so much we could talk about with the platform. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight or pick out in terms of what it does that the listeners might be interested in?
I think the really interesting thing for me alongside the advertising is the amount of what's being termed now intent data that sort of sits around all of this. It really interests me. We obviously do website intent data, so looking at on your website and identifying which companies are not converting but showing buying behavior. But we also have the ability to identify who's off your website and showing buying behavior. And then you combine that with the advertising. And what's really interesting to me is actually, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about this being all about multiple tools that you put together to allow you to have conversations with those enterprise companies and build those relationships is with the ability to identify topics, for example, or in the advertising campaigns, to be able to put different types of messages in front of a company, and then to start to see which types of content are causing that engagement, if you like, that interaction, means that you start to be able to not just tell your sales development team who they should pick up the phone to, which is in reality one of the most difficult things for sales development teams, I think, today, is you can spend so much time going after companies and actually them going nowhere. And so if we can just move the needle so that they're more likely to connect, more likely to have a conversation, that's great. But then when you get on the phone and have a conversation with them, if you're doing it cold, knowing the angle by which you want to start that conversation, which topic, which of the various USPs that you have as a business do you focus the conversation on? If you get that right, it means that you have a much better quality conversation with that person. And that obviously is a really good step towards building a higher quality relationship over the course of what could be months.
That's really interesting. I mean, the fact that intent data is not only useful for targeting, but also determining topics and then helping the SDR when they're on the phone. I mean, that I can see how you've built this platform around kind of driving the advertising, working out what to say and who to say it to, and also seeing whether it works by tracking on the website. That's great.
Yeah, and we are nowhere near finished. I have a roadmap for many years.
So if somebody was interested either in terms of what they've heard today, or they'd like to talk to you about all these other exciting new developments in the future, what would be the best way to get in contact with you, Riaz?
There's the easy way via our website. There's obviously a form there, but you're more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message there, or just send an email to hello@radiateb2b.com.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time on the podcast, Riaz. It's been fascinating. I wish we had more time. We could have talked about a lot more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Lovely to talk to you as well.
Thanks so much for listening to Marketing B2B Tech. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, please make sure you subscribe on iTunes or on your favourite podcast application. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website at napierb2b.com or contact me directly on LinkedIn.